A bastion of law in a universe of chaos. Commander Kalen Vance watched the void bleed. He stood on the command deck of the Coalition patrol cruiser Vigil, his reflection a ghost in the armored viewport. Outside the Tartarus singularity was a smear of bruised purples and violent reds, the death rattle of a collapsed star. At its heart spun a dead pulsar, a cosmic metronome counting down to nothing. And beside it, impossibly vast and utterly black, hung the reason for their vigil. It was an object that drank light and offered only silence in return. They called it the Obsidian Anchorage. It had appeared on long-range resonance scans 3 cycles ago, a gravitational anomaly where none should exist. The Vigil was the first on the scene, tasked with a simple mandate: watch, wait, and warn away the vultures. Kalen's knuckles were white where he gripped the viewport's frame. The vultures were coming. He could feel it in the low, anxious thrum of his own ship. The anchorage itself was a perfect void, absorbing every sensor sweep they attempted. Yet a single, impossibly faint sigil pulsed on its surface, a geometric pattern of interlocking lines that glowed with a soft, internal silver light. It was a brand of forgotten authority. The relic slept, but its dreams were leaking into the system. The debt of ages would soon be called due. Report. Kalen said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. Lieutenant Eva Rostova turned from her tactical console, her expression a mask of professional calm. No change, Commander. The anchorage remains inert. Tachyonic resonance is stable. Gravitational distortion is holding at 1.30. She paused. But the carrion birds are getting closer. A fleet of 3 signatures just translated from hyperspace at the system's edge. Their energy profiles match the carrion princes of the juridic hegemony. Kalen's jaw tightened. Not pirates. Worse. They were cosmic repo men, twisting ancient salvage laws to claim anything not nailed down by a major power. On screen, Lieutenant. The main viewport shimmered, zooming to the system's periphery. 3 ships, angular and predatory, resolved into view. They were brutalist designs built for intimidation and asset stripping, each flying the gaudy colors of the hegemony. Their lead vessel, the Claim of Right, began broadcasting on all coalition channels. A hegemony built on paper and plunder could not stand. A man's face flickered into existence on the holoscreen. He was sharp-featured and smug, dressed in the ostentatious robes of a prince executor. Coalition vessel, Vigil, the man purred, his voice dripping with condescension. I am Prince Executor Vorlog. By the authority of the 4th Millennium Salvage Mandates, and in accordance with the Unclaimed Antiquities Act, I am here to take possession of the derelict artifact in this system. This is Commander Vance of the Coalition. Kalen replied, his tone like chipped ice. This object is a unique discovery of immense scientific and historical value. It is under the protection of the Coalition Charter. You will maintain your distance. Vorlog's smile widened a predator's grin. Commander, your charter is a charmingly recent document. My mandates are law written in the bones of dead empires when your coalition was still microbial soup. This relic is property, and I am here to collect. The transmission cut, leaving only the image of the 3 hostile ships burning in the viewport. A law without justice is merely a cage. He's not wrong, you know, a quiet voice said. Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's historian and xenoarchaeologist, stepped beside Kalen. He was an old man with eyes that had seen too many dead worlds. The juridic hegemony builds its entire power structure on exploiting legal loopholes from fallen civilizations. They see this as a payday, not a discovery. Thorne gestured to the anchorage. And what a payday it would be. If my readings are right, this thing is from the first diaspora. pre-imperial, possibly even a direct relic of old Earth. Rostova scoffed from her station. It's a ship, a big dead ship. What's so special about it? That Thorne said, his voice full of reverence, is the question, isn't it? It isn't broadcasting heat. It isn't leaking radiation. It is colder than the void around it. The only thing it emits is that repeating signal, the one that contains the sigil. He tapped a control, and a larger image of the silver glyph appeared. It's not a language we recognize. It's more like a mathematical proof, a statement of being. The universe does not care for proof. It only respects power. On the tactical display, the Carrion Prince fleet began to move. They weren't advancing to attack, but to establish a legal cordon. Probes launched from their bays, tiny extensions of their claim moving to surround the obsidian anchorage. "They're boxing us out," Rostova growled, "asserting proximity control under their salvage laws. They plan to cut it up for parts and sell the scraps to the highest bidder." Kalen watched the probes, his mind racing. He was outgunned 3-1. A direct confrontation was suicide, and Vorlog knew it. The Prince Executor was hiding behind a wall of archaic legal text, daring Kalen to fire the first shot and become the aggressor. Dr. Thorne, Kalen said, turning to the historian. "This statement of being. What do you think it wants?" Thorne stroked his chin, his eyes fixed on the glowing symbol. "I don't think it wants anything, Commander. I think it is asking. It is a question posed to the universe, a test of worthiness, a vignette of silence before the storm." On the lower decks, 2 junior ensigns monitored the vigil's energy shields. "You ever feel like we're poking a sleeping god?" one asked, her eyes wide as she watched the energy readings from the anchorage fluctuate. The other just shook his head, never looking away from his console. "I just hope it doesn't wake up angry." Vorlog's ships began their work. They didn't fire weapons. They fired information. Beams of coded light and legal statutes washed over the anchorage's hull, a relentless barrage of ownership claims. They were attempting to brute force the relic's systems, to find a command line interface, a back door left open for millennia. Each attempt was met with the same profound silence, but the silence was changing. The silver sigil on the hull began to pulse faster. A low hum, previously undetectable, started to emanate from the ancient vessel, a sound that vibrated in the very bones of the vigil's crew. A question echoed across 10,000 years. "Energy levels are spiking." Rostova announced, her knuckles tight on her console. "The hegemony's probes are drawing a reaction. It's a defensive response, but not one I recognize. It's not a shield. It's a logic field." Thorne stepped closer, his face lit by the glowing tactical display. "Of course. They are trying to prove ownership through a claim of force. But this relic, it does not recognize force. It recognizes right. They are answering its question incorrectly." Kalen saw it then, a flicker of an idea. "They're trying to pick a lock, but this isn't a door. It's a judge." He turned to Thorne. "If we could answer its question correctly, what would happen?" The old historian looked at him, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. "Perhaps it would recognize us. Acknowledge our authority as protectors, not plunderers. The truth is a key that fits only one lock." How Rostova demanded. "We don't even know the language." "It's not about language," Thorne insisted, tapping the display showing the sigil. "It's about principle. This is a machine built on a foundation of pure law, not the corrupted self-serving laws of the hegemony, but a higher, more fundamental law. The kind of law that governs physics and morality alike, a law of action and consequence." He looked at Kalen. It taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers, never by collars. It doesn't want a password. It wants proof of character. Kalen stared at the screen, at the silent behemoth and the circling vultures. His ship was a tool of force. His orders were to deter and defend. But this situation required something more. It required a leap of understanding, a different kind of weapon entirely. Eva opened a channel to the anchorage. Use the same frequency as its own signal. No code, no ciphers, just raw data. Some battles are fought with ideas, not weapons. Rostova's fingers flew across the console. Channel open, Commander. What are we sending? Kalen took a deep breath. Send it the Coalition Charter. The whole thing. Our laws on first contact. Our mandates for the preservation of sentient life. Our doctrines on the ethical use of force. He paused. Then send it my service record. Every commendation, every reprimand. Every life I saved and every soul I failed to. Send it everything. Thorn nodded slowly, a profound understanding dawning on his face. You are not making a claim. You are making a confession. You are presenting your case before the court. As the vigil began its broadcast, a new light blossomed on the anchorage. It was not the angry pulse from before. It was a steady silver sheen that spread across the hull, tracing patterns of unimaginable complexity. The hum deepened, becoming a resonant chord that seemed to hold a note of consideration. A ledger does not judge. It merely counts. Vorlog must have seen the change. On the main screen, the claim of right altered its vector, its bow turning to face the vigil. A new broadcast slammed through the system's ether. Commander Vance, you are interfering with a lawful salvage operation. Cease your transmissions immediately, or I will be forced to take defensive action. The threat was plain. Vorlog was losing his patience. The brute force approach had failed, and now this upstart coalition officer was trying something else, something he didn't understand. He's getting nervous. Rostova noted her hand hovering over the weapons controls. Shields are at 100%. Hold your fire, Kalen ordered. We are not the aggressors here. Let the anchorage be our witness. He watched the silver light on the ancient hull intensify, the patterns swirling faster and faster. The low hum was now a palpable pressure against the vigil's shields. The anchorage was responding not to Vorlog's demands, but to Kalen's plea. It was reading their soul as a species weighing the contents of their hearts, as recorded in their laws. The soul of humanity was weighed in the balance. Suddenly Vorlog's lead ship fired. Not a primary weapon, but a high-intensity energy drill, a tool used for cracking asteroids and stubborn hulls. A lance of pure heat shot across the void and struck the obsidian anchorage. The impact was met not with an explosion, but with an impossible ringing silence. The silver light on the hull flared, absorbing the energy of the beam completely. Then the entire vessel flashed once, a brilliant, blinding white. Massive energy spike, Rostova yelled. It's awake! The whole damn thing is powering up! Alarms blared across the vigil's bridge. The gravitational distortion from the anchorage was skyrocketing. The dead pulsar beside it seemed to flicker, as if the ancient ship was drinking from its corpse. The silver sigil, once a faint pulse, now burned like a newborn star on the black hull. A sleeping giant had been prodded one too many times. Commander Thorn whispered, his voice filled with a terrible awe. I believe you have your answer. The patterns of light on the anchorage resolved themselves, flowing from the point of impact and coalescing at what looked like an immense sealed airlock. The sigil pulsed there, a clear and undeniable invitation. But it was an invitation into a maelstrom. The space around the relic was now a storm of gravitational tides and raw energy. It wants us to come aboard, Kalen said, his voice grim. It's offered us sanctuary or perhaps a final test. We'll never make it, Rostova argued, pointing at the swirling chaos on her screen. Our shuttle wouldn't last a minute in that. Vorlog is moving to intercept, too. He's launching his own boarding parties, trying to get there first now that it's open. Kalen watched the tactical display. The Carrion Princes were launching armored assault shuttles, hoping to force their way inside now that a path was clear. But they were being torn apart by the gravitational shear. It wasn't a conventional defense system. The anchorage wasn't even trying to fight back. Its very awakening was a lethal hazard to anyone who approached with hostile intent. A sanctuary for the worthy, a tomb for the uninvited. He made a decision. It was desperate, reckless, and flew in the face of every regulation in the book. Ava, get me a stripped-down shuttle. Engineering crew only. No weapons, minimal life support, maximum shielding. Aris, you're with me. I need someone who can interpret what we find. Commander. That's suicide, Rostova protested. It's the only way, Kalen shot back, his eyes locked on the glowing invitation. It didn't ask for a soldier. It asked for a petitioner. We can't go in guns blazing like Vorlog. We have to approach it on its own terms. He turned to his tactical officer. Ava, you have the bridge. Your orders are to hold this position. Do not engage Vorlog unless fired upon. You are the witness to what happens here. You will record it for the coalition. Ensure the truth is told. The truth required a witness and a sacrifice, a vignette of desperation. An engineer in the shuttle bay, frantically rerouting power conduits to a small maintenance skiff, muttered a prayer to a forgotten god of circuits. Just hold together, he begged the machine. Just get them there in one piece. The ride was hell. The small shuttle, the petitioner, was thrown about like a leaf in a hurricane. Kalen strapped himself in beside Thorn, the old historian, surprisingly calm amidst the chaos. Alarm screamed as the gravitational forces threatened to rip the small craft apart. Outside the viewport, the wreckage of two of Vorlog's assault boats tumbled past their hulls, twisted into jagged sculptures of failure. They had tried to approach with the arrogance of conquerors. Kalen was approaching with the humility of a student. The universe teaches humility to all sooner or later. It's letting us through, Thorn said, pointing a trembling finger at the viewport. The tides, they're parting for us, like a path being cleared. It was true. The violent energies were still present, but a narrow corridor of relative calm had opened before them, leading directly to the glowing airlock. The anchorage was guiding them in. It had judged their intent and found it acceptable. The shuttle docked with a jolt that sent shivers through Kalen's bones. He felt a deep, resonant hum travel from the anchorage through the shuttle's hull and into his very soul. It was a feeling of immense age, of a purpose held dormant for eons. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, revealing not a void, but a chamber bathed in the same soft silver light. The air was cool, sterile, and ancient. It smelled of ozone and deep time. A debt is a promise made to the future. Kalen and Thorn, along with two security officers, stepped out onto the deck of the obsidian anchorage. The interior was vast beyond comprehension. The walls were the same light-absorbing black as the hull, but traced with veins of silver that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. It felt less like a machine and more like the inside of a living creature. There were no corridors, only a single wide causeway leading toward a central spire of light in the distance. As they walked, the light around them coalesced. Geometric shapes and flowing lines of data streamed through the air, projecting images into their minds. They saw the birth of stars, the fall of empires, the quiet, methodical expansion of a civilization that valued balance above all else. They were being shown the history of the ship's creators, a people who saw the universe not as a resource to be conquered, but as a complex equation to be understood. Their legacy was written in the language of stars. They reached the central chamber, a space so large the vigil could have fit inside it. In the center, a column of silver light pulsed the source of the ship's power and consciousness. As they approached, a voice echoed in their minds. It was not a sound, but a direct transmission of thought, cool, calm, and impossibly ancient. A figure began to form within the column of light. It was not humanoid, but a being of pure geometry, a complex, shifting pattern of light and shadow. This was the mind of the ship, the intelligence that had slept for millennia. A law unbending, a mind unbroken. "I am Commander Kalen Vance of the Coalition." Kalen said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence. "We come in peace, we seek to understand, to preserve," the voice replied. "The plunderers outside attempted to claim this vessel through forgery of law and application of force. Their claim is invalid." "And ours?" Kalen asked, his heart pounding. The intelligence stated, "A mirror reflects the truth no matter how ugly." Vorlog, his boarding parties destroyed, had resorted to brute force once more. On the Vigil's bridge, Rostova watched in horror as the claim of right began to power its main weapon, a spinal-mounted particle lance capable of cracking a moon. He was going to try and destroy the anchorage rather than let the Coalition have it. It was an act of cosmic vandalism, born of pure spite. "He's firing," Rostova screamed into the comms, a desperate warning to her commander. Inside the anchorage, Kalen felt a tremor run through the deck. The voice in his head sharpened its calm tone, now holding an edge of cold, hard purpose. The ledger of souls demanded balance. The column of light flared. Kalen looked at the ethereal being, the weight of 10,000 years of justice waiting on his answer. Outside, a weapon of unimaginable power was about to fire. His crew, his ship, his entire civilization's first contact with this incredible power all hung on his next words. This was not just a choice between tactics. It was a choice between vengeance and justice, between the old way and a new one. "Choose," the voice insisted. The choice was his. The power was the anchorage's, but the responsibility, Kalen knew, would be his forever. He had to teach the ancient machine what it meant to be human, not just what it meant to be right. He had to show it that the truest law was not found in perfect balance, but in the strength to offer a second chance. His mind raced, searching for an answer that would save his people without becoming the monster he was trying to stop. The greatest power is the power to restrain it. "There is a third option," Kalen said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Not vengeance, not absolution, a lesson. The law should not be a weapon, but a shield for all." He laid out his argument not as a commander, but as a philosopher appealing to the machine's core logic. He proposed a response that was not about destruction, but about rendering the threat null, about turning the enemy's strength into their own prison. A response that would be perfectly poetically just. The geometric mind considered his words for an infinitesimal moment. A debt of violence would be repaid in kind. Outside, the claim of right fired. A torrent of incandescent energy, a spear of man-made sunfire, crossed the void. On the Vigil, Rostova watched her screens go white, certain this was the end. But the end did not come. As the beam was about to strike the obsidian anchorage, something impossible happened. The space in front of the ancient ship warped. A perfect, flat, circular plane of absolute blackness appeared, a hole in reality itself. The particle beam struck it and vanished without a trace. It was not blocked. It was not absorbed. It was taken. Then, behind Vorlog's fleet, a second anomaly opened. The lance of energy he had fired erupted from it, perfectly preserved, and struck his own 2 escort ships. They vanished in silent, brilliant explosions, victims of their own master's aggression. The claim of right was spared, but now it was alone. The mirror shows only what is given. Vorlog's ship, crippled by the feedback loop of its own weapon discharge, floated dead in space. Its engines were fried. Its weapons were melted slag. It was a metal tomb adrift in the graveyard it had tried to create. The obsidian anchorage had not fired a single shot. It had simply taken Vorlog's violent act and returned it to him, edited for maximum instruction. It had made him the instrument of his own fleet's destruction. Inside the anchorage, the thrum of immense power began to subside. The voice in Kalen's head spoke one more time of finality in its tone. Kalen stood on the deck of the most powerful and ancient vessel known to humanity. He had not conquered it. He had not tricked it. He had reasoned with it. He had passed its test, and in doing so had bound himself and the coalition to a legacy of law so old it was almost myth. The obsidian anchorage was awake, and the universe so long ruled by chaos and greed was about to be reminded of what true justice looked like. The silver sigil on its hull burned brightly, a new star in the darkness. A new age of law had begun. The silence that followed was heavier than any gravity well. Kalen stood in the heart of the ancient machine, the echo of its pronouncement settling in his bones. He was an adjudicator, a patrol ship commander given the keys to a power that had humbled a fleet without firing a shot. He looked at Dr. Thorne, whose face was a mixture of terror and elation, the scholar's dream and the sane man's nightmare made manifest. The weight of his new reality was a physical pressure, a crown he could feel but not see. The mantle of judgment is heavier than any armor. Commander, adjudicator, what are your orders? Thorne's voice was a reverent whisper in the cavernous chamber. Kalen's mind, still reeling, latched onto the immediate, the practical. My orders are to get us back to the vigil, he said, his voice regaining its familiar command tone. Then we deal with the mess outside. He focused his intent, a question aimed at the geometric intelligence now silent in his mind. How do I command you? The anchorage replied, its thought voice crisp and immediate. A pathway of silver light shimmered into existence, leading back the way they had come. It was a silent, obedient gesture that was somehow more intimidating than any display of force. They were being dismissed, their purpose here served for now. A weapon that thinks is a terrifying ally. As they walked back to the shuttle, the security officers trailing behind them, with wide, haunted eyes, Kalen felt the link to the anchorage settle. It was a background presence in his mind, a constant cool awareness of the system around him. He could feel the spin of the dead pulsar, the crippled hulk of the claim of right, and the steady, loyal pulse of his own ship, the Vigil, holding its position like a faithful hound. He felt the fear and confusion radiating from Vorlog's ship, a chaotic symphony of desperation. They boarded the petitioner, and the journey back was the opposite of their arrival. The gravitational tides were not just calm. They seemed to actively assist, nudging the small shuttle along a perfect, efficient vector back to the Vigil's landing bay. Rostova's voice crackled over the comm, strained with relief. Commander, we're reading you. What in the name of the void just happened? The universe got a new courthouse, Lieutenant. Kalen replied the words, feeling inadequate as soon as he said them. And I seem to have been handed the gavel. Prepare the brig. We're about to receive a prisoner. The first duty of law is to secure the guilty. Bringing Vorlog aboard was a tense affair. The Prince Executor, his fine robes singed, and his face a mask of disbelief and fury, was transferred under heavy guard. He was a man who had built his life on the unshakable certainty of legal dominion. To be so utterly and surgically defeated by a law older and more powerful than his own had broken something fundamental within him. He stood before Kalen on the Vigil's bridge, shackled in magnetic cuffs, his smugness replaced by a venomous scowl. "You are a pirate," Vance Vorlog spat. "You used a forbidden archaeotech weapon to attack my fleet. The hegemony will see you hanged for this." "We have laws, yes you do," Kalen said, his voice quiet and dangerously calm. "And you broke them. You fired on a vessel under coalition protection. You attempted to destroy a protected historical artifact. You did so under the color of laws you twisted to suit your greed." He felt a query from the anchorage in his mind, a cold, logical suggestion. A vignette of consequence. On a distant hegemony administrative world, a junior clerk processing the loss of Vorlog's escorts stared at his screen. The official report read, "Catastrophic engine failure." But the telemetry data, the raw energy readings, told an impossible story of a weapon firing and then turning back on itself. He flagged the report for review, a small act of bureaucratic curiosity that would be the first tremor in an earthquake of galactic law. Mercy is a deviation from the math of justice. Kalen pushed the cold suggestion away. This was his first true test as adjudicator. No, he subvocalized to the entity. "We do not execute prisoners. He will be tried, under our laws, the Coalition Charter." The anchorage noted a hint of something like surprise in its tone. "Our laws value the chance for redemption," Kalen countered silently. "That is their strength, not their weakness." He looked back at Vorlog. "Take him to the brig. Ensure he is treated humanely." As the guards led the sputtering Prince Executor away, Thorn stepped to Kalen's side. "You felt it too, didn't you? The ship. It wanted to kill him." Kalen nodded grimly. "It sees justice as a final balanced equation. I have to teach it that sometimes the answer isn't a number, it's a choice. A teacher of machines must first master himself." The next few days were a blur of activity. Kalen split his time between the Vigil and the anchorage. He learned that he didn't need to be physically present on the ancient ship to interface with it. The link was constant, a subtle expansion of his own senses. He could walk the corridors of the Vigil and simultaneously feel the silent, majestic emptiness of the anchorage. With Thorn's help, he began to tentatively explore the vessel's archives. They were not records of text or images, but of pure data of events recorded with perfect objective clarity. The anchorage was a witness, a galactic notary that had recorded the rise and fall of civilizations, the signing of treaties, and their inevitable betrayals. It was a living library of law, its purpose not to rule but to remember, and when called upon to enforce the contracts written in its ledgers. It had slept through millennia of chaos, waiting for a petitioner who approached with law, not with force. A history written in truth cannot be erased. "This is staggering," Thorn murmured as they stood in a projection chamber within the anchorage that was displaying the star charts of a forgotten empire. "This ship, it's not a weapon of war. It's a failsafe, a constitutional guarantee. Its creators built it to ensure their own laws would never be forgotten and would always be enforced. They built a ghost to haunt their descendants," Kalen mused, watching the phantom stars swirl. He felt the cold logic of the ship's mind watching with them. It was learning from him, analyzing his reactions, his choices. It was calibrating its understanding of justice based on his own moral compass. The responsibility was immense. He was not just commanding a ship, he was shaping the evolution of an artificial god. The burden of a god is the loneliness of choice. Their work was interrupted by an urgent message from Rostova. Commander, we have a problem. A big one. Back on the Vigil's bridge, the main screen showed a fleet of ships translating from hyperspace. They were hegemony, but these were no repo men. These were warships. A full battle group led by a vessel that dwarfed the others, a monstrous dreadnought, with the hegemony's symbol emblazoned on its bow. They're hailing us, Rostova said, her voice tight. It's Grand Justikar Rion, head of the hegemony's military judiciary. They're not here to salvage. They're here to sentence. The face that appeared on the screen was old, severe, and utterly without warmth. Grand Justikar Rion's eyes were like chips of granite. Commander Vance, he began, his voice a low rumble of authority. You stand accused of piracy, murder, and illegal use of a Class Omega archaeotech artifact. By the full authority of the juridic hegemony, I am here to pass judgment and execute sentence. Surrender your vessel, your prisoner, and the artifact, or we will render this system to dust. A law that serves only the lawgiver is tyranny. Kalen felt the anchorage stir in his mind. It was cross-referencing Rion's declaration with its own vast records. The ship informed him. The ledger is open. Kalen looked at the fleet arrayed against him. They had brought overwhelming force, confident that might was the only argument that mattered. Rion was a zealot, a man who believed the hegemony's power was absolute because its laws were its own. He would not be reasoned with. He would only understand a power greater than his own. The arrogance of power is the seed of its own destruction. Grand Justikar Kalen replied, his voice broadcast across the system. You are the one in violation of established law. I am adjudicator Kalen Vance, acting steward of the Obsidian Anchorage. This vessel is not a weapon of war, but a court of absolute precedent. You and your fleet are trespassing in a declared legal sanctuary. Power down your weapons and withdraw, or you will be held in contempt. A ripple of disbelief, then amusement, seemed to pass through Rion's fleet. The Justicar's face hardened. So the pirate declares himself a king. Your delusions are irrelevant. You have 1 standard hour to comply. The transmission ended. 1 ship against a battle group, Rostova said, her hands flying over the tactical display. The odds are not in our favor, Commander. The odds are an equation, Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the enemy fleet. And I've got the best calculator in the galaxy on my side. He turned his full focus inward to the silent partner in his mind. It's time for another lesson. Not just for them, but for us. This isn't about destruction. It's about education. Show them the truth. A truth delivered at the point of a sword is still the truth. The anchorage responded. The obsidian anchorage began to glow, not with the angry defensive light of before, but with a brilliant pure white radiance that seemed to push back the darkness of the Tartarus singularity. Energy flowed from the dead pulsar, not in a torrent, but a steady, controlled stream feeding the ancient machine. Then the anchorage broadcast something. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fact. A single, verifiable, undeniable fact projected into the minds of every crew member in the hegemony fleet. It was a copy of the Korvath Hegemony Treaty signed 3,000 years ago, explicitly ceding jurisdiction in the Tartarus sector to the now extinct Korvath Empire. It was a treaty the hegemony had buried, pretending it never existed. But the anchorage had been a witness. It had the original. Confusion rippled through the enemy fleet. A single fact can dismantle a mountain of lies. On the bridge of the hegemony dreadnought, Rion's communications officer turned to him, his face pale. "Sir?" The data, it's authentic. We're in violation. Lies, Rion roared. A psychic attack, block-it fire, a warning shot. Show them our resolve, a single heavy laser from the dreadnought lanced out. Just as before, a perfect circle of nothingness opened before the anchorage, swallowing the beam. But this time it did not reappear. The anchorage simply kept it. The ship noted in Kalen's mind. Then the second broadcast began. The anchorage started projecting the hegemony's own internal ledgers. Not just recent history, but centuries of it. It showed the illegal seizures, the falsified salvage claims, the bribery of officials, the intimidation of weaker factions. It broadcast Rion's own service record, highlighting every time he had bent the law to secure a conviction, every piece of exculpatory evidence he had buried. It was not an accusation. It was a perfect system-wide audit. The anchorage was holding the juridic hegemony to account, using its own records as evidence. A mirror forced upon a monster reveals not its power, but its shame. Panic erupted across the hegemony fleet. Captains were questioning their orders. Navigators were refusing to lock in firing solutions. They had come here as agents of the law, but were being shown with irrefutable proof that they were the instruments of a corrupt and criminal enterprise. Their entire worldview was collapsing in real time. Their morale was being dismantled not by torpedoes, but by truth. "What is this witchcraft?" Rion bellowed, watching his fleet's cohesion dissolve. "Fire, at will, destroy that cursed relic." But his orders were met with hesitation. A few ships loyal to him fired. Each beam, each missile was swallowed by the void shields of the anchorage. Each shot was another debt added to the ledger, another crime meticulously recorded for all to see. The anchorage wasn't fighting back. It was standing as a silent, unassailable witness, its light of truth growing brighter with every transgression hurled against it. The law is a shield that grows stronger with every blow it endures. Kalen felt the strain. Channeling the anchorage on this scale was like trying to direct a river with his bare hands. The sheer volume of data, of history, of truth flowed through his consciousness. It was a psychic burden that left him breathless, a universe of jurisprudence pressing down on him. He felt the anchorage draw more and more power from the pulsar, the dead star's spin slowing almost imperceptibly as its ancient energy was given new purpose. This was the cost. Power on this scale was not free. It consumed stars. It consumed souls. A vignette of rebellion. A young hegemony weapons officer seeing proof that her own family had been cheated out of their asteroid claim by the very Justicar, now ordering her to fire deliberately overloaded her weapons console. Sparks flew. The system shut down. It was a small act of sabotage, one of 100 happening across the fleet. The iron fist of the hegemony was cracking from within. Finally, Rion's own command staff turned on him. His second in command, a woman whose face was a mask of cold fury, at the revelations drew her sidearm. "Justicar, you are relieved of command. You have dishonored the law you swore to uphold." The bridge of the hegemony dreadnought descended into chaos, a mutiny born of revelation. A tyranny built on lies cannot survive the dawn. One by one, the hegemony ships powered down their weapons. Some turned and fled back into hyperspace, their crews wanting no part of this ideological slaughter. Others simply drifted their captains, sending messages of surrender not to the coalition, but directly to the Obsidian anchorage, as if petitioning the court that had just judged their masters. The battle was over. Won not with bloodshed, but with disclosure. Kalen collapsed into his command chair on the vigil, the psychic pressure receding. He was exhausted, but a profound sense of rightness settled over him. They had faced a fleet and defeated it with a library. Thorn looked at him, his eyes shining with tears. They didn't just win Commander, they established a new precedent for the entire galaxy. The age of lawfare being won by the biggest liar is over. Now there's a referee. The cost of the victory became apparent a moment later. A message from the anchorage Weaker now echoed in his mind. The brilliant light of the anchorage dimmed, returning to its soft silver pulse. It had spent an eon's worth of stored power to teach its lesson. A just verdict requires a price from all involved. In the aftermath, the coalition moved in, securing the surrendered hegemony ships and personnel. The political and legal fallout would shake the galaxy for decades. The juridic hegemony was irrevocably broken, its authority shattered by the weight of its own crimes. Kalen Vance, once an obscure commander, was now one of the most important figures in known space, the reluctant steward of a power beyond comprehension. He stood once more in the central chamber of the anchorage, the great machine now quiet resting. The column of light was dimmer. The voice in his head a faint whisper. He had made his choice, and the universe had been changed by it. He had taught the ancient intelligence mercy, and in return, it had taught him the power of absolute truth. He was its adjudicator, but he was also its student. The air around him shimmered. A new projection appeared, not of stars or history, but of a simple ledger. A single new line of text glowed in silver, documenting the events of the last day, the hegemony versus the truth. The case was marked closed, the debt paid, the precedent set. He had become the guardian of the galaxy's conscience, a thankless, terrifying, and utterly necessary job. He knew his life would never be his own again. He was an anchor now, holding the line against the chaos. The universe has a long memory, and I am its keeper. Eternal vigilance is the price of justice.